Hi, this is Robin, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about and demonstrating different Photoshop methods to restore details to blown highlights. Now, when we're out doing photography, there are a variety of ways to maintain dynamic range or to prevent blown highlights when we're out capturing images with our cameras. So we can do things such as watch the histogram and expose for the highlights to avoid clipping. We can use exposure bracketing or use a neutral density filter when we're shooting either in bright light or with long exposures. And then at all times, it's best to shoot in RAW to give yourself a fighting chance to salvage badly exposed pictures. But sometimes we can't do all of those things or some of those things because either the circumstances of the shoot just don't allow you to, or in the pressure of a fleeting moment to capture something, we just forget to make the settings or don't have the time to make the settings. So when that happens, what we can have happen is end up with blown highlights. And this is what I mean by a blown highlight right up here in this sky. Blown highlights are those glaring white, overexposed areas of our image with no image detail in them. So in this video, I'll demonstrate a mix of tools and techniques that can help us repair blown highlights in Photoshop. Now, what I'm going to do is show several different approaches because not every tool and every technique will work for every image that you might be working with. And I like you to have a variety of tools in your Photoshop tool belt to draw from. So in the demos on this video, I'm going to show how to use the healing brush, the lasso and content aware fill, the brush tool, the clone stamp, and some other filters that will help salvage blown highlights. And what I'll do is, because there are 4 demos and you might want to just deal with one at a time or come back to them or whatever, I want to make it convenient for you to find them quickly and go where you want to go quickly so you can hop around. So I will list the chapter start times for each demo in the description below the video, and then you can just click on that link and it'll take you to that part of the video. Now, the examples that I'm going to use in this video will include blown highlights in both skies and on fabric. But that doesn't mean you're limited to only using these techniques. Anywhere you have blown highlights, you can use the same kind of processes and apply them to your situation or to your image. Now, before I get started on the demos, I do just want to quickly remind you that if you haven't already subscribed, and it is free, to my channel and clicked the black bell icon so YouTube can alert you to my new educational videos, you can do so below the video. So just click the subscribe button if you haven't already, and click on the black bell so you get the notification, and then you'll be all set. If you have subscribed before, there's nothing you have to do. You're all set. The one other thing that occurs to me is, as I'm developing these tutorials and classes for the channel, is if there are Photoshop topics you'd like me to cover and have any requests, please mention them or type that into the comments as ideas for future video topics in the comments below the video. And I'll check it and see if there's something I can add that might be helpful to a bunch of you. So anyway, here we go. Let's get started with the demos and move on to show you how to repair blown highlights. So in this first video, we have a relatively small blown highlight here in the sky, in this sunset over an ocean. And one of the things I want to point out here is, often when you have the blown highlights in a sky above water, and often a big body of water like an ocean, there'll be a big white reflection from it going across the ocean. Well, we don't have that here. But if you do in your image and you're going to follow the processes I'm going to show you, then you're going to have to do some repairing in the water too, because it would be unrealistic for there to be no blown highlight in the sky and yet some bright white reflections in the water. So I guess the takeaway is, be consistent if you're repairing blown highlights If it's in the sky and the water, either do it very lightly in the sky and lightly in the water, just so it's a realistic scene, or repair them both in the same level of degree. Okay, so now let's get started with this after that caution to you. So the first thing that I always suggest when we're doing repairs or work in Photoshop is to duplicate our background layer in the layers panel. So you can, in this one, I'll just drag it and drop it to the bottom of the layers panel to the box with the plus, which is the new layer icon, and we get our backup copy. Your alternative here would be on this background layer to click Control or Command J, and that would do the same thing. All right, so now what I am going to do, but you don't have to do, is I'm going to create 2 empty layers above here. So you would only need 1, but I'm going to show you 2 different methods, and then you can decide which one you might want to use for your images. So I'm going to come to the bottom of the layers panel, click on that same add new layer icon twice, and that way I get 2 empty layers. And in the first technique I'm going to show you, we're going to use the mode equal to replace, and that is a very literal mode. Okay, and in the second technique I'm going to show, and these will both be with the same tool but just different modes, the mode I'm going to use will be darken, if I can spell darken, and darken tends to smooth. So I just want you to see what the different results will be, and then you can decide for yourself which of the modes you would prefer to work with for your images. Now, the tool I'm going to work with, and again, my toolbar is docked right, is the healing brush tool. And if we come down, it's this tool that looks like a little band-aid. And if you hover over it, it should, there we go, say healing brush. If yours isn't visible, look at this little arrow that points down, right-click on that. And if yours is not at the top of the list, then you can just click on healing brush and bring it to the top so it's visible. And make sure it's got the black clicked behind it so that it is active. Now, before I use the healing brush tool on this image, I just want to show you, and if you'd say, well, why wouldn't she just go to the camera raw filter and adjust the highlights and the whites? Well, let me show you why not. So going from this background copy layer here, let's go up to filter at the top of the interface, come down to camera raw filter, click on that, and you don't need to do this because I'm showing you why you shouldn't do it. So watch the blown highlight here as I, over in the right hand side here, click on the arrowhead in the highlight slider, and I'm going to pull it left to darken it because of course it's bright. And I'm going to just keep releasing it and watch what's happening in the image. The image is just getting darker and duller, and it's not getting rid of the blown highlights. So working with the highlights in the camera raw filter is not going to help. So let me reset that to 0. Let's see if whites is any better, because again, it's a white area. So clicking on that arrowhead and pulling that slider to get it darker. Again, I just see the image getting duller and nothing is happening to improve these blown white highlights. So I'll set that back to 0 and I'll cancel out of the camera raw filter. Yes, I want to cancel out. Okay, so now that we see that that didn't work, now let's try this healing brush tool that we have active in our toolbar. And I'm going to turn on this the visibility for this first layer, click on the layer where I'm going to work with the replace mode and make sure that that's the active layer, this empty layer. And for all of these tools in the toolbar, if you're not familiar, they all have their own options that can be set in the options bar across the top of the workspace. So what I want to do is for this layer, I said I want the mode, which is right here, to be replace. So if you click on this little down arrow, if yours is not on replace, you can try it on replace if you like how this is going to turn out and decide you want to use the replace mode. I keep my source set to sampled because I do want to sample from within this image and then paint a parallel line to where I'm going to be painting. I want the sample running across at a parallel distance from my painting area. So I do want it sampled. I'm going to sample and then paint using a path for that sample. Also, I want, for this example, this set to align. So you can see right here, I have a click to align, so you can click that off or click it on. I want it set to aligned because I am going to be doing longer painting motions versus a click, click, click. So I'm doing a longer stroke, so I want the sample to stay aligned with what I'm painting over so that it mimics it. So that's why I have that set to aligned. And then as far, I'm not going to use legacy, I'm using the current system. And for sampling, I want this set to current and below. So you have options there, current or all, or current and below. I want current and below because if I try to sample on this layer over here on the right, nothing's going to happen because this is an empty layer. So I need it to sample from below where there are colors. So that's why I have it set to current and below. Okay, so now the one last thing I want to show you is I keep it set to a very soft brush, so it's to far left because hardness means the further to the right, the harder it is. So I use a soft brush, and I like to, anytime I'm repairing things, I like to have my brush set to just a little bit bigger than the thing that I'm repairing. So when you look here where my highlighter, the green highlighter is the highlighter. The black circle in the center is my brush size. So I'm going to use my right bracket. And can you see as I do that, it makes it a little bit bigger. And I want to make this just a little bit bigger than the blown out area so I'm not over painting. Okay, so now, since we want it to be on sample and paint, the first thing I'm going to do is position my brush where I want to collect a sample. So for me, it's going to be right in this area here. And I'm going to press and hold the Alt or Option key. See how it changed? Watch it again. Watch the center of my highlighter here. When I press Alt or Option, it does that. Then you left click with your mouse to collect that sample and release the Alt or Option. So now if I come down here, you can see the sample is in there. So now I'll just start painting over this area. Okay, so I'll say it again. We'll go through it again. So left Alt or Option, left click with the mouse, collect the sample, release the Alt or Option, and paint. Okay. If we want to get some of this darker blue color in here, might make my brush a little bit smaller. Alt or Option, left click to collect the sample, then come up where you want to paint and just paint. Okay. And what you'll see is when I do that, and then let me do a sample here. Watch when I paint, you'll see a little plus sign, and that's where it is sampling from, okay? All right, so there is the first example that I want to show you. And so that's using the mode right here, set to replace, and that's on this layer here. So let's just turn that eye visibility on and off so you can see before and after painting with mode set to replace. And you can see that's why I said it's literal, because it's very definitely holding the shapes of what you're sampling and painting from. So now let me turn that eye visibility off and move up a layer here, turn this visibility on. This time I want to set the mode to darken. So let's come over to the options bar to where it says mode, go to that little down arrow and click on darken. Okay, so we've changed the mode to darken. And something that this gives us, because as I said, it smooths, is all these other things we're going to leave exactly where I had them set before, but now because it smooths, we get a diffusion setting, and that tells you how smooth, how even you want the transition to be between different areas that you're working. I tend to like to leave mine set to 5, so it's sort of right in the middle, and it's not too soft and it's not too hard. So I leave my diffusion set to 5. So let's try the same process we just did a moment ago to sample and paint, but this time with the darken mode, and see if we get a different kind of a result. Okay, so again, Alt Option to collect the sample, left click with the mouse, raise that mouse button and just paint. Okay. And now I'm going to Alt Option, select a sample with the left mouse click, release the Alt Option, and paint. Alt Option, left click with the mouse to collect the sample, release the Alt Option, and paint. Okay, and I think I'm going to leave it right there. Maybe we'll just do a teeny bit more here, just to get a little bit of this blue in here. So Alt Option, left click with the mouse to collect the sample, and then let's just get a little bit of blue in there so that it looks consistent with what's going on in the rest of the sky. And you can paint some more elsewhere too, but I think you get the point, is that when you're working with this healing brush, you use Alt Option depressed and hold it depressed. Place your healing brush to where you want it to collect the sample. Make sure the brush size is as big as you want your sample to be, but not too big. Then click with the mouse, left mouse key to collect the sample, then release the Alt Option, and then just paint with that sample. Okay, so now let's look over here at the layer that has mode and darken, which smooths as opposed to being literal, and see what we get. So I personally like that look better. So we can go from this to here's the replace mode, which I think is a little harsh, and there's the darken mode. So we've gone from the original with the sky blowout to that. So that is all I wanted to show you in this demo with regard to repairing blown highlights. Now, once you've done things like that, then you can go on and do some other finishing in the image. And you might, because this is all kind of dark, so you may want to do some tonal adjustments for finishing, which has nothing to do with the blown highlight, but it just has to do with going on and doing more post-processing with the image. So if you do have an image that you think might need some additional tonal adjustments to give it more oomph or more punch, then I do have other videos in different series on my channel with regard to how to work with tonal adjustments. So that's just an FYI. So let me put this back to my neutral tools that I like to work with. And I'm going to close out this demo number 1 and move on to demo number 2. Okay, so now in this image, it's another image. This is demo number 2. And in this demo image, you can see we have different sized blown out highlights. So there's this thin little strip of blown highlights across here, and then there's this larger area of blown highlights over in this area. And I'm going to show different tools to deal with the different areas and the different sizes of the area. So first things first, I'm going to duplicate the background layer so we're not working on the original. So you can use a Control or Command J to jump that up to its own layer. And this is my background copy. And I don't like to work on the original images, so I prefer to always have a duplicate. Okay, so for now in this image, we're going to work, as I said, on 2 different tools. So in this narrow area here, I want to work with the brush tool. So come to the toolbar and get the brush tool, which is right there, and it looks like a paintbrush. Be sure the black is dark behind there, so that indicates that that's an active tool. Be sure you're working on your background copy. And also you want to be sure that you're working with a soft brush. So let's look at the features for the brush, which is right here. So I have my hardness at 0. And I think for this one, I want to work with a low opacity because I don't want it to have the line I'm painting be too strong and become an obvious line of a color any more than I want it to be an obvious line of a white blown out. So in the opacity area of the options bar, I'm going to left click on that word opacity and start dragging this to fairly low. Let me try 20 to 25 and see what happens with that. I am going to keep my flow at 100% because if you lower the flow, each time you paint, it builds up color and depth of tonality, and I don't want uneven tones. So I just want it to be not too intense of a single laydown of a color versus multiple overlays, which is what the flow will do if it's adjusted. Okay, so now I again am going to do what I did in the first demo. I'm going to add an empty layer to work on. So in the layers panel right here, come to the bottom to the add new layer icon, which is that box with the plus, and we get an empty layer. And this is, I'm going to work with the brush tool. And that's going to be on the narrow area right in here. Okay. Now, again, just like the previous tool, what we have to do is sample the adjacent colors and then paint with them using the brush tool to paint over the white highlight that's blown. Okay, so again, I want to keep my brush size, which is that black circle in the center of my highlighter, just a little bigger, yeah, than the area that I'm going to paint over, so I don't end up with a lot of weird edges. So to collect a sample that's adjacent to what I want to paint over, I position that brush where I want to sample, press and hold Alt or Option, and see this little eyedropper pops up in the center of my green highlighter, and that means then I left click with my mouse to sample that color, and then release the mouse and the Alt option and just start painting. And this is why I didn't want to use it at 100%. And I sample fairly regularly. So each time you see the eyedropper appear, that means I'm pressing Alt or Option, collecting a sample, clicking with my left mouse to collect that sample, then releasing both the Alt option and the left mouse to paint. Like this gets bluer over here, so I want to get a selection of that. Let's sample with the Alt option, left click, and paint over the white blowout. And again, you can see not only am I using a small brush to go just beyond, but I'm doing fairly short strokes. So again, I might speed things up and do it longer, but just take the time that you need to make it right for your image. I might take some shortcuts and go a little faster just because I don't want you to have to watch every single thing I do here. But keep sampling and painting adjacent to the area. I might get a little of this blue in here too, just to match what's going on. Over here it's definitely bluer, so I sample, Alt option, sample some of this blue with the left mouse click, and then paint with the brush tool. Alt option, sample, and left click, release both, and paint by left clicking, or if you're using a stylus, you'd be painting with your stylus. Okay, so I think that I'm going to call that good enough for demo purposes, because I would take more time with my own image, and I'm sure you'll take more time with yours, but that's what the brush tool achieved in getting rid of that blown highlight in the center in that little narrow area. Okay, so now I'm going to add, let me put this back to neutral and put this, oh, before I leave this, let me put the opacity back up just so if we start doing something else, I don't get confused. So let me add at the bottom of the layers panel another transparency layer right here. And this time for this bigger area, I'm going to use different tools. So I'm going to work with the lasso to delineate the area. And let's say plus. Content, whoops, helps if you can type. Content aware fill. Okay, and so that's what that layer is going to represent. All right, so now we're going to use the lasso tool, which is over here in the toolbar, at least on mine. So I've customized this, so depending on where yours is, but it looks like a little lasso. So left click on that, make sure the black is on it so that it's active. And what I'm going to do is draw a loose lasso around this area that I want to work with here, around this big white blowout. And when you do it, stray into the color. So don't just define around the white area that's blown out, stray into these surrounding colors, because you want to let Photoshop know to use those colors as a reference. Okay, so I've done my lasso around the white blowout area. I've included it. I've gone a little bit into the color areas that I want to be sampled. And now we have the selection of that area with the marching ants. And now what I want to do is right click inside that enclosed marching ant area. So right click with your mouse and come down to where it says content aware fill and left click on that. And Photoshop will do its thing here. Okay, so now we're in a content aware fill area. And let me just scoot this over so we can see what's happening here, and I can show you a little bit what's happening with content aware fill if you're not aware of it. So if we look here in the right hand part of the interface where it says content aware fill, I have mine set so that this masked overlay color is this magenta color, and what it represents is the area that is being sampled to tell Photoshop what to fill the inside of the selection with. So in other words, it's saying use these colors that are behind this overlay and the content that's behind that overlay to fill in this area that I have selected. Now, if it does too much, you'll notice if you look here in the center of my green highlighter and where the brush is, that there's a minus sign. So if this has selected more areas than you want sampled to be used, you can paint away parts of the highlight. So let's say this is very dark here and it's getting into the hills, so I don't want all of that used as a sample to fill that in. And maybe I don't want all of this. So I'm just painting using my left mouse, or you could be using a stylus, whatever you're using, away areas that I don't want used for the sample. Okay, so I'm saying only Photoshop, only sample from where I have this pink overlay. Because it was only a minus, let's say there was a really good color you'd like to have used over here somewhere. Then you can press your Alt or Option, and it changes that to a plus, and you can paint over and highlight, create the overlay in the areas that you want to be used that Photoshop didn't automatically capture. Okay, so now that I've determined the areas we want sampled to fill this blown highlight area, we can look in the preview box here, see where my green highlighter is. So we come over one more set to the right, and if we look in that area of the sky, we can see what Photoshop is saying it's going to do by sampling using content aware fill. To me, that looks pretty good. If you want to make it bigger to see it better, you can use this slider here and that'll zoom in so you can see better. But I'm feeling pretty happy about that. And one last thing to mention with this content aware fill, I usually do not go back to my launch layer just in case I change my mind about something. So I have it set to go onto a duplicate layer. That's my choice. You can go back to the original if you want. Click OK once it looks like you're getting a good preview. And that takes us back into the Photoshop workspace, and you can do a Control or Command D to get rid of the marching ants. And honestly, I think that looks really good to me just like that. I don't think I need to fool around with this anymore. So let me show you the before and after. So before with the big blown highlight and the narrow blown highlight. And this is after we've done the brush tool to get rid of the narrow one and the content aware fill after having lassoed the area that we want to have content aware filled over there in that area. So, and the thing is, if you feel that this maybe looks a little unrealistic or a little too perfect, well then it's just like if you remove wrinkles on a person and you don't want them to look plastic, you reduce the opacity a little bit so you see a hint of a wrinkle so they don't look like they're a mannequin or something. Same thing holds here. So realistically, there'd be probably some light shining behind the clouds. So if you go to your layers panel over here on the upper right, left click on the word opacity or use a little down arrow in the slider, it's your choice, and just lower the opacity. Just watching it a little bit here. I think it starts looking a little bit more realistic if you lower the opacity just a little bit. So we've gone from that to that, which I think looks pretty realistic. So that was using the brush tool for the narrow area and the lasso combined with content aware fill for the larger blowout area. So hopefully that will work for some of your blowouts, whether they're on skies or not. As I said, they could be on a tabletop and your flash created a bad reflection and you were setting up a still life and then you ended up with the blown highlight on the table. These things are not limited to just skies. You learn the technique and then you apply it where you end up with the problem of the blown highlights. So that's why I said I wanted to show you different techniques, because different ones work better or less well depending on the situation. So let's call this one finished and we will move on to the next demo. So I'm going to close this out. Okay, so this will be demo number 3. And as you can see in this image, and by the way, if you didn't notice already when you watch this, I have left, these are all stock photos. And so where I have the name of the person whose photo it is and the source I got it from, which was Unsplash, I've left their name in the file name so you know credit for whoever did the photo is being given for each of the stock photos where I knew the photographer's name. Okay, so now in this image we have these 4 brightly colored umbrellas and the white umbrella, but a really, really large blown out cloudy area behind them. And so what we want to do is to be able to repair some of these sky areas here, the blown out sky and cloud area, but not damage the umbrellas in the process of doing it. So again, I'm going to do the usual thing in the layers panel here on the right. I'm going to duplicate my background layer, and you can either drag it to the bottom of the layers panel to the add new layer icon, the box with the plus, or on that background layer you can click Control or Command J to jump it up to that layer. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to get these umbrellas out of the sky and just create a background sky to work on so I don't damage the umbrellas anyway. So what I want to do is with my toolbar tool on the object selection tool, which is this square with the arrow pointing into it, I want to go to the top of the Photoshop interface to where it says select subject and left click on those words select subject, and look inside of my highlighter, you'll see Photoshop's thinking, and it has now selected the 4 umbrellas that are floating in the sky. Okay, so now we want to be able to remove these umbrellas and put them in a safe place for while I'm working on the sky and trying to restore some detail to the sky. But if I just fill these in, I'm going to be left with residue from the edges of the umbrellas, and I don't want that to happen. So what we're going to do is, while the marching ants are still active, the selection of the 4 umbrellas is still active, we want to come up to the select menu up here at the upper left where my highlighter is, come down to where it says modify, go to the flyout, and come down to where it says expand and left click on that. and we get this little expand selection box. Now, I tend to, when I want to do this kind of thing, expand by 3 to 5 pixels. You can experiment for yourself and see how many works for you if you want to try this method or technique. But 3 to 5 generally works for me. So what I mean by expand selection is I want Photoshop to push this away from the edge of the umbrellas, all of the umbrellas, by 5 pixels and just give it a little bit of a buffer so that when I fill in that area, it doesn't leave the edges of the umbrellas behind. So I've got that expand by 5 pixels and I'm going to click OK. And you're not going to see much expansion because it's a very tiny amount, but let's just take my word for it that it did expand it. So now what I want to do is copy these to their own layer. So I'm going to do a Control J, and if you look in my layers panel, it's Control or Command J. So if you're on a Mac, you do Command. And let me just hide those eyes. So now we have the umbrellas on a nice transparent layer all their own. So I'm going to type here umbrellas only. Okay. And then I'll turn the visibility for the background layers on. I'll turn this visibility for that layer off. Okay, so now what I want to do is Control or Command and click on this umbrella layer I just created. So Control or Command depressed and left click. And if you look here in the image, what that has done is reactivated the selection of the 4 umbrellas. Now that we have the selection active, come back to the background layer, left click, and make sure the background layer is active and not your transported objects layer. And I'm mentioning this approach to you because if you do have things in the sky and you don't want to potentially mess them up, you obviously won't necessarily have umbrellas. But anyway, so now we're back on the background layer, and what I want to do is now get rid of these umbrellas. I want to fill them in so that we just have a complete sky with nothing in it that we can work on to do the healing. So I want to come into one of these umbrellas and right click and come down to the bottom of this menu to where it says delete and fill selection. So we're not doing the content aware fill this time, we're doing delete and fill selection. And with any luck, it'll fill all of them. There we go. So now we have and I'm going to relabel this in the second layer, sky only layer, okay? So now we have this big blown out area here on the right, and we have clouds with some detail on them on the left. And in this demo, what we're going to do is work with yet another tool. So again, you get another type of facility to work with. So this time, coming to the toolbar, we're going to come down and click on the clone stamp tool, and it looks like a little rubber stamp symbol. So that's that right there. And I left click and you can see it's active because it's got the black behind it. And as I said, all of the tools in the toolbar for Photoshop have their own options. Okay, so we're going to look in the options bar across the top here, across the top, sorry, not across, there's no T at the end. So we're going to set the mode to darken. So if you come over to where there's a little down arrow next to normal, let's find darken. Here's darken. And left click, and so we change the mode to darken. And then I'm going to change the opacity to 90%. I'm just going to go down a little bit just so it's a little bit less than 100%. I think it'll help it maybe blend a little bit. I don't know, but we'll see. All right, that 91 is close enough. And then aligned. So keep coming over the flow. Again, just like I said before, I don't want it building up as overlays each time we click. So I want to keep the flow on 100%. I just want to lower the amount that it's being laid down by a little bit. Okay, and then remember in the other tool we had aligned on because I was doing a long painting stroke. So I wanted the sample to stay aligned. Well, in this case, I don't want the sample to be aligned because I'm going to do a click and stamp, like what you would do with a rubber stamp. So I want it unaligned. So make sure that that is set to off. Okay. So now with those set, and we can leave it on, even though I'm just working on an image layer, we can leave this set to current and below. All right, so now what we're going to do is sample different cloud layers, just like we did sampling in the other demos, and then paste them or stamp them, and to the point of the clone stamp, over into this white area. And I'm not going to be super careful with this because for demo purposes, I just want to show you what you can do. But you can take your time and do things as you like. Okay, so again, the size of the brush is the black circle. So you can decide if you want to use your bracket keys and make that. We have it soft. Yes, we can adjust the size there. Sometimes my left and right bracket keys don't work, so I have to help it out over there just to get it going. All right, so I am going to position this clone brush tool or clone stamp tool over an area that has some detail that I like. I'm going to hit my Alt or Option to again get that sampling circle, left click with the mouse to pick it up, and then release the mouse key and the Alt Option. And then you'll see, look, if I'm on the white, you can see following, it's got a sample of that area. So I'm just going to start. And again, I'm not being too precise or going to get too careful because for demo purposes, I just want to show you the process. Okay, so let me grab another style. So again, it's line up the black brush where you want it, Alt or Option, collect the sample with the left mouse click, release everything. And I want to get some more blue up in this area here, maybe some blue down in the corner. Okay, collect another sample. Okay, and then now I'm just going to collect some more with just the gray areas first, or the bluish, pale blue areas versus the dark blue. Sample, click. Okay, and I'm going to not spend too much time doing this just because you get the idea where you position your brush where you want it or the size you want it. You know, different sizes obviously will collect different size samples. Press Alt or Option to collect the sample, left, and you collect the sample by left clicking with the mouse. Then release the Alt and Option, and then just paint with the left mouse button or your stylus to place it and to clone it over. Now, the next thing to look for with this is, because we're sampling from a limited area of spaces, at least on this image, you might end up with some shapes that keep repeating. Like, so let me get this back to here. So see, there's some very distinctive shapes here. You might start seeing those same shapes appearing over and over, and you don't want somebody to say, that's interesting that those clouds have the same shapes appearing over and over again. So what I would recommend is do a cleanup after you have done your sample and clone stamp, sample and clone stamp, wherever you need to do it. And that is at the bottom of the Layers panel, go to the Add New Layer icon, which is the box with the plus, and above that sky repaired area, using your remove tool. So the remove tool looks like a band-aid with some extra little doohickeys around it here. And then I would work on that empty layer and just look and see, okay, do these two things look too much alike? Let me just paint over one of them. Am I seeing too much of the same kind of shapes? And the remove tool will get rid of some of those overlapping or similar shapes so it doesn't look too parallel or symmetrical throughout your cloud. Because somebody will start seeing patterns and then their eyes will register it and it won't strike them as right. I don't like this line. This was actually in the actual photo and I just don't like it, so I'm going to take that out of there. Okay, so you get the idea. So wherever you feel that there might be a little bit of too much matchy-matchy or too much sameness, then you can use the remove tool to get rid of that, okay? So once you get that repaired, then you can go back to relaunching your umbrellas only layer. So click on that, click the eye visibility, and put your umbrellas back again. Now, the thing is with this is, let me zoom in so you can see what's happening here. Remember that when I first selected the umbrellas and made them, I expanded the selection so that there wouldn't be a residue of the edges of the umbrella left when I wanted to create that sky layer. I did an expand by 5 pixels. Well, the trouble was is the selection captured that. And of course, there was all white blown out sky behind it when we captured that. So now you're seeing that white fringing. So we want to get rid of that. So if you've done something and you end up with some white fringing from your blown out area, this is what I'm going to try to do to see if I can get rid of the white fringing on this umbrella here. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is command or controller command to click on these. So now you can see better, now that it's zoomed in, that it is not aligned right with the edge of the umbrella. It is certainly about 5 pixels out. So now I want to do the inverse process to what I did before. So we're going to come to the top of the interface, to the top of the Photoshop workspace, select menu, come down to where it says modify, and this time instead of expand, which is what we did before, we're going to contract. So we're going to pull it in the same amount that we expanded before and contract by, so I've got it, mine set to 5. You would set yours to however many pixels you expanded by in the first place, because now you want to contract it. Okay, and did you watch it hop? The edges of the selection hopped back to on the edge of the umbrella. So now what I want to do is, because we have the umbrellas selected, I want to inverse because I want to take this out of the sky. So I want to do the opposite. I want everything but the umbrellas selected at this point. So we're going to come to the top of the interface to select inverse. And now we've selected everything but the umbrellas. And I'm going to add a black mask to this umbrella layer because I want to hide anything that's outside of the umbrellas at this point, and that'll in the process hide that white fringe that was residual from before. So to add a black mask, bottom of the layers panel, come to this icon that's a box with a circle in it, and to make it black, come up as a black mask, press Alt Option and then left click on that, and there we go. So now you can see we've added the black mask and it's protecting the umbrellas, but it's hiding the area outside of these umbrellas, which is where that white fringe was. Okay, so now you see we no longer see the white fringing there from the previous blown highlights of the sky. And so now let me show you the before with the blown out sky and the repaired blown highlights. Okay, so that was using the clone stamp tool for this process. Okay, and I'll say sky just so you have it for reference, plus, if I can type, clone stamp tool. Okay, and so that I think worked pretty well. But that said, if that's too many steps for something you want to deal with, and maybe you have some kind of subject that's even more complex than this was movable and easy to get rid of these umbrellas. But if yours is more complex, it might be a lot easier to just go to Edit, Sky Replacement, and get yourself a sky that's not full of blown highlights. But if you want to at least try to salvage something of what you shot, this is an approach that you can try if you ended up with a lot of blown highlights in the sky and a subject in front of the blown highlights. So that, again, is the end of that demo. And now we'll have one more demo. And in this next demo, I'm going to show how to work on fabric. So let me close this. And open the next images. And as I said, we're going to work on fabric. Okay, and as you can see, this time I've got two images here. And I'm going to use, so this is demo number 4, and what we have is blown highlights on fabric. And as I said here, I'm working on this bridal gown for the demo, but that doesn't mean this will only work on a bridal gown. So you can think about how you could translate the same process in any of your fine art photos, whether it's with white birds or other very white subjects that got blown out. So it doesn't have to just be a method that is used strictly on fabric or strictly on bridal gowns. So let's get started on this, and I'll explain what I'm doing here. So as I said, I've got these two images open this time. My original image that I want to repair the highlights on, and what I'm calling my reference image, which is over here on the left. So the first thing I want to do is duplicate the background layers for both of these. So in the layers panel, I'm going to drag this to the bottom of that layers panel to the add new layer icon and get a background there, background copy there. And on this one, I'll do a Control or Command J, and just so we see different methods, and get a background copy here. Okay, so we're not working with the originals. Now, again, I'd like to show you why I'm not working with other tools so that you don't wonder what the heck I'm doing here and why I'm working with what I'm working with. So if we use this background layer on this original image and go up to the camera raw filter, so filter, camera raw filter up here, and let's just see what happens if we try to lower the highlights and make this less bright and blown out. So you can watch the image. I'm just going to pull the highlight slider left. And it's not helping. I mean, it may be bringing back a little detail here, but it looks to me like it's just getting a little gray and dingy. Yeah, so that's not good. And then let's try the whites, because this is a white gown. So white slider in camera raw filter. Trying it at different points just to see. And no, again, it just makes it a little dingy, and it doesn't bring back any of the details. So that didn't help. Okay, so we're going to cancel out of the camera raw filter. Yes, cancel, because that didn't help. Another thing you might want to try for your image is up in the image menu at the top in the interface. See where my highlighter is up here, upper left, and adjustments, and come down to where it says shadows and highlights, and left click on that. You can see it already made some changes, and we have a shadows area of adjustments, the highlights, and just general color. So let's see if we try to bring anything back in the highlights. I'm seeing a little bit of detail coming, but it mostly looks like it's getting grubby, and we can always mask out the background. I'm worried less about what it's doing to her in the background, because we could block that out, we could mask that out. But to me, it's just making her dress look all dingy, and so to me, that's not helping. She doesn't need a gray bridal dress, so I'm just going to cancel out of that too. So neither the camera raw filter or the image adjustments, shadows, and highlights will help with this kind of a situation. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use the reference image and overlay a piece of this reference image onto a reference fabric onto her dress to build back some fabric details. Now, you can't just randomly do this, and especially if it's somebody's bridal gown. But what I did, and what you would need to think about too, is you need to look for something that will match your original objects, textures, shapes, whatever that you're trying to repair. These are both bridal gowns from the Martha Stewart collection, and I have nothing to do with Martha Stewart, but the point being is I knew I wanted something from probably the Martha Stewart line, because it would have similar draping and shapes to what she would have going on, because that would be a style that I'd be designing to. You can see they're completely different kinds of dresses, because she's got a sheer tulle here, and this is a more translucent. Also, this is sort of a blushy color, and this is a white. But I'm completely ignoring the upper parts, because I just want to get some more details back in the blown whites. But I can use this draped detail here on this dress, because you can just see it's draping similarly to this. So what we're going to do here is, with the lasso tool from the toolbar, so that's the one that looks like a lasso right there, active, I'm going to come over to this reference image in the reference fabric, and I'm just going to draw a lasso around an area of fabric that I want to transplant over onto the original image. And I'm not going to go all the way out. I'm just going to select an area. Okay, so now I've made a selection. You can see the marching ants there in the reference image and the reference fabric with the shapes of details that I want to be over here. Now, with that selection active, I'm going to go over to the Move tool in the toolbar, which is the one that looks like a cross right here. Left click on that to make it active, and you'll see we've gotten these bounding boxes and this little widget in the center. You can click anywhere inside this bounding box, just don't click on the widget, to drag that piece of reference fabric or whatever it is that you're using for your image over onto your original image, okay? And while this bounding box is still here, I want to rotate it a little bit. So if I come outside with the tool, see where my green highlighter is right here? I'm going to come just outside of that bounding box until you see the two little arrowheads are bending. So that means I can rotate this. So I want to rotate this a little bit to fit the shape of her dress, because she's standing in a different direction than the young woman in the other gown. All right, so I've gotten that at least rotated, and then I can accept that. So left click on that. All right, so now what I want to do is get off of the Move tool. I'll just put it back to my neutral lasso tool here. And what I want to do is adjust this reference fabric on her dress so it fits to her dress and her body shape and how it would probably be draping a little bit better. So what I want to do is go to the Edit menu, which is here at the upper left, come down to where it says Transform, fly out to the Flyout menu, and come down to where it says Warp. So Edit, Transform, Warp, left click. And again, another bounding box. So now I can click inside on this sampled fabric and just start pushing it. So I've got my I'm using a mouse, so I can left click and then just push and try to arrange this so it would better replicate the shapes that would follow her body and how the flow of the fabric would be falling on her dress. And I don't want to come too far out, because you can see that clearly she's got a sheer layer of tulle on her dress. So I don't want a more opaque or translucent fabric coming and interfering and giving it away that it's not what's on this dress here. All right, and so I like that this line here is coming from the line of her back, and it looks like it would flow and drape this way if it was her actual dress. And then down here at the bottom, notice that there's this little area here in this reference dress. I'm trying to get that shadow to line up with the shadow that was on the original dress, so that, again, the folds and the drapes look like they're mimicking what's on the original dress. Okay, so you get the idea. Use the Warp tool, Edit, Transform, Warp, to just push and shove whatever it is that you're putting into place to match, whether it's feathers, whether it's whatever, the direction of what something might be going on the object that you're trying to repair. So once you get that warped the way you want, come to the top of this interface and left click on the check to accept it. Okay, so you can see that's there. And this is going to be the reference fabric layer. Okay, now something I like to do, I told you I don't like to work on the background. Well, after going to all that trouble, I also like to create what I call an insurance layer for myself, so I don't have to start all over again if something goes south. So I'm going to drag that layer to the bottom of the layers panel to the add new layer icon right there, and then I'm going to turn the eye visibility off. And this is my insurance layer. I have a backup in case something happens to the copy that I'm going to work on. Okay, so now, as I said, this is like a blush or a kind of a completely different color than this bright white dress that this young lady is wearing. Hers might even have a tinge more yellow in it. So next step is, if your reference material, wings, feathers, whatever it is that you're using, don't match, try to color harmonize them to your background. So with this reference fabric copy active, I'm going to go to the top of the interface to filter, neural filters right there, left click on that, wait for it to load, and the neural filter that I want to use is harmonization. So see, it's under the color category, and this is going to harmonize it or make it look like it's right in context, is basically what harmonization is. And I'm going to turn on that little switch, so push it to the right if it's off. Now, if you look in the right hand panel here, it's asking you to select a layer. So what that means is it wants you to tell it what it should use for reference for color harmonization. So I'm going to click that little down arrow, and I am going to use the background copy. You can use the background too, but again, I just like to work with the copy. So now Photoshop is working down here. It goes pretty fast. And so it has applied some color harmonization, and you can see it's definitely added a little bit more of the greens or the yellows, and it's not the same kind of blushy color that it was before. And then there are some settings over here. If I pull my little scroll bar down, you can set how weak, there it goes, or strong the strength of the harmonization is. So I think for mine, I'm going to stick pretty close to where it had it in the first place. I think I'll go around there, maybe a little bit more. Okay. And now, because there seems to be a yellowy tinge to this, it probably picked up some of the grass versus, because there's a lot more grass than there is dress showing to match to the dress. So, and grass in Photoshop would tend to typically be a yellow. So I want to counteract some of that yellow that was put into that. So if we look at the yellow slider, the opposite of yellow is blue. So to diminish some of the yellow, let's just pull this a little bit towards the blues and wait for it to process. And okay, I think that's a little more neutral. Okay, I'm going to call that good enough, but you can tell for your own image whether you need to adjust the cyan, the red, the magenta, the green. So if you had too much magentas, you'd push it to the green. If there's too much greens, you'd push it to, so whatever there's too much of, push it the opposite direction. I don't need any saturation, but I do want to add some brightness because this, you can see it's duller and darker. So I think I want to add a little bit of brightness to this as well so that it takes the reference fabric a little closer to her fabric. Ah, that's a little better. Maybe can I go up more? Okay, I'm going to call that close enough. But again, I would spend some more time playing with this if it was for my actual use for something, because I can still see tinges of yellow or magenta in here too. So once you get the settings adjust it as you like, then you want to accept it. But again, I don't like to overwrite my current layer, so I change that to put it on a new layer. I don't like to overwrite things in case things don't look right. Once you decide where you want it to be placed, then click OK. Wait for a second, and now we're back into Photoshop. So that was the reference fabric copy. So that was straight from the reference image dress. And this is the harmonized reference fabric. Okay, and so, yeah, you can see it definitely made some changes to this. So now you could, I'm going to turn off my reference fabric and just work on the harmonized layer here. So if you want to, you could do some masking. So if you look at her original image, let me just go back here. Her arm and her hand is there, and this is being covered. So what I want to do is add a mask onto this harmonized reference fabric layer so I can paint back in some of the details on the original image. So with that layer active, bottom of the layers panel, come to this box with the circle, which is the mask, add a mask icon, and we've got our white mask, which means it's revealing everything on that layer. So if I want to paint away some of the content, I need to use my brush tool, which is right here. It looks like a paintbrush. And I want to paint with black, because in Photoshop, black hides. So let me zoom in just a little bit so we can see what we're doing. The black circle inside my green highlighter is the brush tool. So I'm just going to start painting so that I can bring back her arm and hand. And I'm painting on the mask, so you can see the mask is active because it has the white frame around it. So don't paint on the fabric layer right there, on the layer icon, or whatever it's called. You just paint on the mask. Okay, so I'm painting back in her hand, and I'm painting in some shadow under her arm from the original image, just bringing that back and restoring it. Looks like she has a little bit of a pocket, or else she's just holding on to part of it. Okay, and so you'll see that if we look at the mask, that's all I've painted away. The thumbnail, that's the word I was groping for. Don't paint on the thumbnail. So now it's revealing some of the detail from the original image. So if I zoom out, now we have this. Now, the final thing we might want to do is, again, just like what I did with the sky images before, this is still pretty intense, and it also makes it pretty obvious that it's a heavier fabric that's on there. You can see it's heavier looking than this light tulle that she has in her dress. So coming back to the thumbnail and making sure that the white frame is around the thumbnail, come to the layer, top of the layers panel, left click on opacity, and let's just from time to time release it. And what we want to do is try to keep some details, but not so much that it looks like there's something artificially overlaid on there. That's looking pretty good. Yeah, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. I think we can see that, let me look at the original versus that. So that's pretty good. If I zoom in close again, then I can maybe add another empty layer. So bottom of the layers panel, add a new empty layer with the add new layer icon, and again come back to something like the remove tool. And if we see any lines that look like they maybe wouldn't fit, I don't particularly like this black here. So I'm making the brush very small. You can see the black is the brush. Just painting over the part I want to go away. And that's looking pretty good. Now the other thing, in an instance like this. I'm feeling pretty good about how well the draping of the fabric has come in here. But one other thing you might try if you end up with something like mine, and hopefully this will work. So again, bottom of the layers panel, come to the add new adjustment layer icon right here, which is the circle with the line through it, and come down to hue and saturation. And I'm going to clip this. I'm clipping this so that they only apply to this layer. And with this hue and saturation thumbnail active, you see you get a little eyedropper, and I want to click in here and see what, yeah, see it's saying it's still kind of yellow. So in the properties panel for the hue and saturation, I just want to lower the saturation for the yellows a little bit and maybe increase the lightness a little bit so it's a little less obvious. I'm just going to sample. So that's saying green, so I definitely don't want the greens in there. And same thing, less saturation, a little lightness. Okay, and so you can tinker with it, but for yours, but I just wanted to show you that if you need to adjust the hue and saturation, you can do that too. So I feel pretty good about what we've done here, because using this as a reference image that had a similar drape to what was missing over here, we were able to move that over, use it as an overlay, and then harmonize the colors, and then move and warp and stretch the reference fabric to fit onto the source, onto the original from the source document. And let's see how we did here. So before was like that with absolutely no details left on her bridal gown, and now we have a sense of draping, and you can see it would follow the same type of draping. If yours still looks a little intense in terms of the heaviness of it, you can reduce it even more and just get a hint of the drape. But to me and to my eye, I think it's better to get a little bit of distinctive shape of the draping in there versus a totally blown out dress. So that was the end of that demo, and that's the fourth and last demo for how to repair blown highlights. And again, I specifically did not call this how to recover details in blown highlights, because if you've overexposed that badly and in extreme ways, you really can't recover the detail. Even if you're shooting in RAW, you can recover a little bit if you're working with RAW, but certainly not to the level that I demonstrated in each of these 4 demos. So I hope that helps. I hope you learned some new techniques to repair and to restore detail in your images with blown highlights. And I'll try to create a complimentary video on how you can restore or recover details in a blocked up or clipped shadows. So that would be the inverse situation for my channel also. But until then, take care.